Should you be teaching your kids to code, or is that all going away in the future? That's what we're talking about today on Emerging Technologies with Warren. Hi, I'm Warren Whitlock. I'm a futurist. I have been in technology now for going on 50 years and trying to stay ahead of everything. I had a computer before other people. I had the internet before others, and I built a couple of businesses on that. And especially in the last 20 years, I found that I am still teaching younger people about things that I already know about, not because I'm so smart or I am that connected, just because I've been in it for so long and I know these things and I can tell you what's going to come in the future, or at least the trends that I think are going to continue. That's the important thing about the future. The future is not going to be completely different, and it's not going to be just the same. We know that for sure. Are we certain about that? Yeah, I think that's one thing for certain. There is no certainty coming up. So today, let's talk about the idea of the future being belonging to coders. They were saying, Mark Andreessen said, software is going to eat the world. And 20, 30 years ago, I think he was right on that software was coming to everything, meaning that no matter what business you were in or what job you had, software was going to affect things. I used to use the example of somebody running a service crew and they go to houses to paint, and there's a small operation and there may be three or four painters working together and one guy's in charge. And I watched as they got cell phones and they started being able to interact with their customers and get to the next job, get the crews together, and still go out on the job and be one of the workers. So it increased their productivity. The first example was somebody came to my house to fix a washing machine, and I stood around to watch because I was fascinated by how they changed the way that a washing machine was put together. I'd actually worked on one earlier. And so I'm standing there waiting for him, and he gets 3 phone call interruptions. If I'd have been going about my business, working in my home office or sitting in the garden or whatever, it wouldn't have made any difference to me at all. But at first seemed a little bit annoying that he was dropping working for me to talk to somebody else. Like I say, he's there for 30 minutes and it was all of 5 minutes he spent doing that. So today, that's considered completely normal. And so then we started talking about how you had to learn to code. You had the technology was going in. And then lately, all the talk is about AI and how it's going to take over everything. And meanwhile, we're still saying learn how to code. Well, here's an experience that I can prove to you why you still want to learn how to code. Way, way back about 50 years ago, when I first got involved in computers, I learned about coding because it's the only way you could get anything done. You had to type in what you wanted. Even my first computer I owned, the first thing I did was in the back of the instruction manual, back when computers shipped with thick instruction manuals. I read about a game to make a ball bounce around the screen, and I typed it in 3 or 4 pages of code and then tried to run it and it kept crashing. And I fixed what was wrong with it. And then, bam, I got it to make the ball bounce around. Took a class about basic, and it was very basic. You gave it commands, and the big thing I learned out of that was a for next loop, an if then statements, the logic it takes to tell a computer what to do. That's knowledge that served me, and no matter what I've done since. And I'll tell you how it really served me. Just a couple of days ago, not even 48 hours ago, I had one of the companies I advise talking to them about what I wanted to do with a project I just inherited. And it has thousands of web pages and it has tens of thousands of items in databases and 8 million users. And how was I going to get a hold of what this project was? We'd had it before, but it had been sold off and then was coming back and on my plate to take care of. And he says, I used to program on that same cloud that you're using. And he said, let me help you out. He's just started within the past week a very experienced coder, entrepreneur, has built all sorts of projects, is building an AI right now. He said, I just installed the latest version of Claude on my server and it's doing amazing things for me. I said, what? You, the great coder, you're using something else to code? I've been hearing about stories about increased productivity. And he said, yeah, and I'll put it in for you. And then he ran a command, and Claude went out and looked at all of the architecture of everything that this website had for 20 years, and then came back with a summation of how it was built and told him some things in a 3-page report that frankly it was I had hard time keeping up with that, but I immediately saw the potential. So I got logged in to a console, something I hadn't done in a long time, and started typing commands. And it took me a while. It took me over an hour until I finally got Claude running in a Claude terminal. And this is the same as you get when you do a chat on Claude AI, same as ChatGPT, but I just had this installed on my server and with access to all of the resources that we have for that website. And I started asking it about things. And number one was we had been sending an email out to 100,000 people that are on our mailing list and agreed to get emails. And it came back and said, oh, the subject line was missing, something like that. And so that it failed, it crashed. And I said, I used to pay somebody a lot of money to go in and fix that. And I said, what can I do? So I asked Claude. And wouldn't you know it, within a couple of minutes and a couple of different commands and looking, it says, I found what you're doing. You're using it in a non-standard way. Again, somebody had written code for this. And your code is doing this and doesn't check for the kind of mistake that was made when you were sending that email. And it said, what would you like me to do with it? I said, I'd like you to delete it. And it came back and said, yes, it's deleted now. And by the way, I've written software so that this won't happen again. I'd like to insert that into your send routine. And so from now on, when I send email, if the same mistakes are made, it will catch it and send back an error and let us know. That was, like I say, less than 48 hours ago, probably 46. I want to be specific. Since then, I've had trouble sleeping. I've had trouble getting anything else done. I've been exploring things that I asked for when I was in charge of this years ago that I could never get done. That it was just, there were too many things on the to-do list to get the 3 people working on the code to get to. And I found out that could get to it right away. There's some stuff that was not set up right. The website has ads, and you don't want the ads to run in some places. And the people that had taken over for a while had changed things that we need to change back. We found out that most of the people buying something were led into not getting the product they wanted, and then no system, the system had been killed to take care of the people that were complaining. So I said, that's easy to fix. Let's give them all extra free service and change their status so that they are treated like a VIP. And Claude came back and said, do you want this tag changed? And I said, no, it's a field, not a tag. Again, relying on the bit of coding that I know about. I've always read a lot about how to code, very little time spent at a terminal doing it. And sure enough, it came back, it fixed all that. And we're sending an email today to those people to say, sorry, here's a freebie to make up for what we did. Come back and use the site some more. Now we have to change and get rid of the code that was selling that little product so that we're going to discontinue that product. I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to ask Claude Code is what it's called. It's the same Claude as you see if you go to the Claude website, but this is running it through the back end, and it's installed on my machine. And so that it's called Claude Code and uses a terminal. And had I not studied programming all those decades ago, I would be stuck. Further to that, just the logic. If you understand if then and if then else and for next. Back then we were saying for next. I don't know that I use that so much, but if then means if something happens, then do something else. That form of logic is something I never heard of for the first 25 years of my life. And then when I did learn about it, I started seeing it everywhere. There, especially when there was the else command. I've used it in spreadsheets. I've used it in management. I've taught other people how to think like that. So instead of saying, we want to have a party, you say, okay, we're going to have a party. What happens if we don't have a party? What happens if we do have a party? What happens if we invite somebody and they don't respond? Do we invite them again? And usually my parties aren't quite that complicated, but I put on other events. So same logic for the party. And also, it comes into play what happens if we buy something? What happens if we don't buy something? That kind of logic in my thinking has helped immensely. In politics and current events, I hear people with talking about there being two sides to an issue. And I now say very rarely are there two sides. Very rarely is it one statement. It has to be red or it has to be blue. It has to be hot or cold. No, it can be warm and a whole bunch of different degrees in between. And when you, especially with dealing with people, there aren't two groups in any type of people. We've learned that recently with the cultural discussions on sexual orientation. I'm still pretty sure you're born one of two ways for the most part. So then you get into orientation, and there's just all sorts of choices that people are making. And whether or not that's right by me or how I do it or anything, I have to understand that those are out there. And I find that when somebody says yes, no, when they're binary in those choices, it doesn't work. Where binary works is in telling computers and AIs what to do. And I hope that if you're thinking about what to do in your career, you study some coding, you studying how it works, and think about the logic of what that is, and make sure that you're using some logic in what you're doing. Instead of saying, hey, that sounds like a good idea, think, that might be a good idea, or maybe the opposite is an idea, or how about something in between? Most dichotomies are false dichotomies. It's not a binary world. And I'm going to keep saying that and keep doing that. And that's it for today. I got to get back to coding.